Almost there, boy. Almost there. Here's my leg. I know it's your leg. Yep. They got ether. Here we go. Here we go. Hold pressure here. Get this off you. They think you an officer. They'll fix you soon enough. Yeah, they're gonna fix you. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Hey.
We need clean water.
Lord is the stronghold of my life.
Captain Jeffrey Bailey here, 7 Tennessee, middle ball, left eye.
Captain! I got a captain here!
Up front! Captain up front!
Hold him down! Hold him down!
I was born on the 17th day of January, 1846. I go back as far as way along the early 50s. My first recollection of public living, and especially political living, as I may call it, was when I learned as a boy of 9 or 10 that my home was in the state of Virginia. I didn't know about states before that time. Then time passed pretty rapidly because I was attending high school, and I remember distinctly the occasion when John Brown, the poor man, sought freedom for the slaves. He's there in my state. I heard about it pretty distinctly. I felt sorry, and yet sympathizing with my elders, I felt some resentment. Now, while some in my section, Southeast Virginia, I knew of some brutality, as I call it, exercised toward some of the Negro slaves, as a whole, the Negroes got along very well. Now, my father's Negroes, why, I associated with them. In fact, being the baby of the family, I didn't have any white children for associates. Therefore, I played around with the Negro children. 4 years passed by. Then came up the great struggle when the Republican Party had become a power in the land. In 1860, Mr. Lincoln was elected, as you know. And I remember that there was a good deal of excitement in my section that the Negro slavery would be interfered with. Negroes would be set free and all that. Well, I didn't feel much interest about it because I felt kindly toward the Dockers, and they were kindly toward me and toward my family. Now, I was attending school, as I said, and when in the spring of '61, when news came that war was actually declared. In fact, it had been coming when South Carolina, as we heard, seceded from the Union. Well, wonder now what Mr. Lincoln will do when he is seated on the presidential chair. Well, there was a variety of feeling about it, even among our 75 or 100 young men, boys, at school. But right at once, when war was declared, about half of our pupils, young men over 18, quit school, joined companies of infantry, cavalry, and in their homes in surrounding counties and in that vicinity. I want to go too, but my father said, "Now, son, you're too young." I was just 15, just a little past. And if the war continues long enough, you may have an opportunity. Well, so I rested, and the war began, and I heard about it. And I heard that at the Battle of Williamsburg, some of my classmates fell in the battle there. Well, I grieved about that, because they were boys that I'd been brought up with. They were a little older than I, but I felt sorry that they were killed. Then, in '62, although General Lee had still a pretty good army, he began to need more men, naturally. Although the big battles, or the largest battles, had not come yet. But my neighbors around there, some of them who were over 45, kinsmen of mine, some of them, began to just get up a company of cavalry. And I, a boy of 16 and a half years old, joined the cavalry company, which afterwards was attached and counted with others among the 24th Virginia Cavalry. Now, for a long time then, from August '62 on, until '64, great battles had been fought in there. We heard of the Battle of Gettysburg. And finally, our company was taken away from the Blackwater border, guarding that section of the country from the incursions of Federal soldiers who might cross the Blackwater River and so on and come over into Confederate territory. We were taken in the spring of '64, our regiment was, in the neighborhood of Petersburg. And while we were camped just north of Petersburg, General Grant began his invasion of that part of Virginia. We heard about it, and I remember very distinctly, one morning we heard that General Lee had crossed the James up north and was coming down the Turnpike Road in the direction of Petersburg, just near us. And the next morning, happening to look while I was on guard, across the James River, there we saw long lines of blue, the infantry of the Army and United States flags on the other side of the James, coming down to beyond the mouth of the Appomattox River that flows into the James, in order to cross on the pontoon bridges and thus begin the invasion of that part of Virginia and in the city of Petersburg. Thus, I was not with that part of the army. My regiment was moved up north of Virginia, out of Richmond, I mean, north of Richmond, and thus we guarded that city for several months while General Lee and General Grant were struggling there near Petersburg. While that was going on, there were some skirmishes, and one, small battle I was in. I was not in any of the larger battles, probably fortunately, maybe unfortunately. Well, General Ewell commanded the General Lee's corps near Richmond, and I remember we were called up one day and took the Darbytown Road, and some mile or two, I don't know, we never counted distances or time in those days. We turned off from the road, main road, and went down a road through a wood. After a while came to an opening, and there was a line of blue boys and with some artillery. And we charged them, and that's where I was struck the first and only time in my leg, which laid me up 2 months. I was sent home on furlough. Now, I want to bring in one or two little points there that might be of interest to some. We were around Richmond, my regiment was, all the time then, on doing little of nothing, while that war was still going on. And after a while, a Saturday evening, the first day of April, 1865, we were ordered, and by the way, in the meantime, about half of my regiment had lost their horses. The Confederate soldiers owned their own horses, and when they lost a horse, it was difficult at that stage to secure a substitute. Anyhow, I lost mine. I've forgotten just now how. I don't believe it was in battle, however, at that time. Now, orders came for a dismounted part, or demounted, I might say, of the regiment to fall in line and march. We stopped on the way and spent the night. That is Saturday night. The next day was a beautiful day, Sunday. We didn't know what was going on. We were within a mile of Richmond, and there was a turmoil there. And that day, as you all know, that day, the President Davis was attending his usual services at his church, St. Paul's Church. Right in the midst of the sermon, the front door opened, and a courier rushed in and went up to President Davis, handed him the paper. He opened it, and it was a dispatch from General Lee saying, "Mr. President, I am so heavily pressed by the enemy that I'm compelled to abandon Petersburg." Mr. Davis arose and left, and the congregation broke up, and in a few minutes almost, there was pandemonium then in Richmond. We marched out of Richmond early the next morning, on the 3rd, and started in a southeasterly direction. We didn't know which way nor where we were going, but afterwards it showed that we were attempting, under General Ewell's command, to come in contact with General Lee somewhere down southwest of Petersburg. Well, the Federals under General Sheridan overtook us, our command of about 3,000, in Amelia County, Virginia, and after fighting several hours, General Ewell surrendered us, and thus I became a captive. I went to prison along with this command, and we landed in Point Lookout, Maryland, down here. And the day after we reached there, as a curious boy, I arose pretty early. We just gotten there the afternoon before. I arose pretty early and went out to see how things looked around in there. There were 20,000 of us, a large encampment. Happened to look across in one direction, I don't know which. Well, there was a flagpole, and a flag on it just rising. I stopped and looked at it with curiosity. It stopped when it got halfway. Well, I knew what halfway flag on a pole meant. I looked at it. I thought, well, the rope that handles that flag must have a knot in it, and I'll see a man presently going up that pole to untangle it. I waited a whole minute, and I casually turned my face in another direction, and there was another flagpole with flag half-mast already. So I put my head in the tent. There were 5, 6 others of us. I was, boys, there must be some big Yankee dead. I wonder who it can be. Of course, we had no means of knowing. And then we waited for about an hour. The sergeant blew a bugle. We, 150 of my company, fell in, and as soon as he finished calling our names, a number of us rushed up and said, "Sergeant, what does the half flag mean?" His face fell. He says, "President Lincoln was shot last night." Well, the feeling, the variety of feeling that came over us 20,000 men in just that one. Of course, there were several other prisoners, as you know. But as for me, and a boy, just 19, I didn't know what to think. I couldn't feel any hatred toward Mr. Lincoln, especially. I didn't feel any special hatred toward any Federal soldier. And when I began to think how kindly General Grant afterwards, on the 9th, acted toward General Lee, I felt kindly toward him. Now, comes up the question of what we Southern soldiers fought for. My friends, as a boy of 16 and a half years old, I didn't think about any abolition of slavery. My mind wasn't developed enough to take in what the politicians had in mind, and hence there was no trouble as to the freedom of the slaves. About half of the Negroes, my father's Negroes, left and went to Norfolk to be under, as they considered, protection, but another half, 40, 50 of them, remained there and cultivated the crops until after the war. The South did not fight for the preservation or extension of slavery. General Lee, as is well known, was making arrangements to free his Negroes, and his father-in-law had already drawn up a part of his will, free his Negroes. My friend, it was a great curse on this country that we had slavery, and I thank God that I did not bring up my boys and girls under a system of slavery under which I was brought under. What did you boys fight for then? Here's what great many people do not know. That as a young man that way I couldn't understand it fully. But I look back now and see my part in it and saw what we struggled for, and that was for states' rights. For states' rights. And as many of you know, immediately after the war, the rights of the various states, well, especially in the South, were very much curtailed, if I may use that word. And since then, I have noticed you let things come up that encroach on the ordinary states' rights, which we have preserved, and we find that the North, the boys that wore the blue, are with us in preservation of the states' rights. General Lee, as is well known, was making arrangements to free his Negroes, and his father-in-law had already drawn up a part of his will, free his Negroes, and saw what we struggled for, and that was for states' rights. For states' rights. And as many of you know, immediately after the war, the rights of the various states, well, especially in the South, were very much curtailed, if I may use that word. The South did not fight for the preservation or extension of slavery.
How old are you? I'm 94. 94, pretty good age for a young man.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, you got me all the time. So how old are you? 84. 84. You was in the same war. Under the same general. Under the same general, General Price. That's good. Fine old man, too. Good man. Good man he was, yes he was, and we was there to stay. We didn't enlist for a month or a year, but we enlisted for the war. As long as we lived, or as long as the war lasted. That's right. Having a good time here today? Fine, we're having a good time. Enjoying ourselves very much. We had a good dinner, too. In 1861, I enlisted in the War of the Rebellion at Warsaw in Benton County, Missouri, under Colonel O'Kane, then a captain. We went to Coal Camp, fought the Dutch, and cleaned them out completely. Lost only 7 of our men with more than 250 of the Dutch killed. No prisoners were taken on either side. From there, we went to Springfield, Missouri, where we had the Battle of Wilson Creek, where General Lyon was killed on the 10th of August. The bravest man I ever saw was General Lyon. After he was completely surrounded and pulled off his horse, he picked up rocks and fought with thousands of men around him. He struck Will Morgan in the face with a rock, and John Morgan shot him with an old-fashioned horse pistol, killing him.
gives me great pleasure in introducing our esteemed superintendent of this audience, who will lead the rebel yell. I'll yell myself presently.
Go ahead. You talk.
Ladies and gentlemen, I feel highly honored at the introduction of our worthy friend and comrade Captain Dr. Lewis, and I will do the best I know how to get that yell up for you. What few of us old corn-feds are left, we'll do all we can. We can't give you much, but we'll give you what we got left. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure of announcing to you that we're going to make an effort to repeat the old rebel yell. 1, 2, 3.
Charge him, boys! Charge him!
And I'll give you the individual there, Captain James Dinkin. General Stevens. Colonel Pierce. Jones. Colonel Jones, I beg pardon. That's all right. No, hold on. Boys! Paul Salvato. Yes, sir. Holla, yes. 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 Holla, holla, yes. Cyrus Lagrange. Holla it out. All right. J.W. Manning. One more. James Blunt. Mr. Powell. Holla. Go ahead. Hurry. Holla. One more. All right. Go put your dress on now. General Pierce. Go ahead. Go for him, boys. Hey, get on the hill, boys. Get on the hill. Hurry, boys. Get on the hill, boys.
So I was 94 years old last January, 15th day of January. I'm 95 years and 6 months old, the 15th day of this month.
Have you got your...
I don't hear him saying anything yet. He's still talking waving his hand.
Yes,
Now, how old are you?
I'll be 94 and...
Say it now.
The last point of that battle was at...
You're right, old boy, and for once you told the truth.
Thank you.
That is now.
Say it again.
Say it again.
The last point of that battle was at Bloody Angle. That's what decided the battle.
That is right.
You're right, boy. You told the truth for once.
Well,
I can't either. Now,
the last point in that battle was at Bloody Angle. That's what decided the battle.
You're right on that.
yes, he's right, isn't he? For once he told the truth.
Mr. Wilson. This is August the 5th, 1954. This is Bob Wambacher. I'm Carl Wambacher. Jim Bernard. And we're going to try to get Mr. Wilson here to answer a few questions. We've got the questions written out on slips. And the first one is, well, we're going to ask him where he was born. I'll hand him a slip of paper.
Near Watertown, New York. Watertown, Jefferson County.
And then we have another question here from Mr. Wilson. Gives you,
Our next question to Mr. Wilson, we're asking him how old he is today.
Mr. Wilson is reading the paper now.
How old do you think? 107.
107 years.
Antwerp, New York. When I was 9 years old, I went in with my father, 4 years here. And 2 brothers, actors on the stage. The youngest one was the one that shot Lincoln later on. We were there that evening after his first time I was in there. But about a week later, one evening, the President of the United States and his wife were sitting in the audience, and he walked up and he shot him right through the back of the head. He lived about 3-4 hours. He says 6 February tyrannies, that means that's the fate of traitors. Oh, Abe.
Yes, hopefully about Abraham Lincoln.
I'll tell you about Grant. Every man in the army loves Grant. You know all about him, I've read about him. He's a man of few words, short, thick sentence. After 3 years, the 2 armies back and forth, a good many men killed. Grant got a reinforcement of his forces that day. He sent a message over to General Lee, Robert Lee. Grant says, I want to have a conference with you tomorrow. And he says, that's all right. You want to furnish a bodyguard? No. Grant walked between the 2 armies right straight over to Lee's headquarters. The army was in plain sight of one another, the 2 armies. Something over 18,000 to 20,000 men on both sides, all together. He says, your cause is hopeless, says to Lee. I will want a conference with you in the morning. And Lee says, all right, on your own ground. So we talked just a few minutes, and the next morning he went over. He said, your cause is hopeless. I give you till 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Yes or no? General Lee sat right down and wrote a message. That was the beginning of the end of the Civil War. You got what Grant done in 15 minutes. Nobody killed or hurt. They said that after all them 3 years of fighting, cannon and the cavalry and Grant does his job in about 15 minutes. Generally, his own men said that he was sick and tired of the whole thing and fighting. General Lee was a brave old man himself. Well, that is an object lesson for posterity. Just think of it, there are thousands of men in the ranks all around there. That one man gets accomplished all that in 15 minutes. All the hundreds of men killed over nothing. Too bad. But that's war. Dynamite wasn't invented at that time, but there was plenty of gunpowder for smoking.
In 1913, the government held a 50th anniversary reunion at Gettysburg. It lasted 3 days. Thousands of survivors bivouacked on the old battlefield, swapping stories, looking up old comrades. The climax was to be a reenactment of Pickett's charge. As the rebel yell rang out and the old Confederates started forward again across the fields, a moan, a gigantic gasp of unbelief, rose from the Union men on Cemetery Ridge. It was then, one onlooker said, that the Yankees, unable to restrain themselves longer, burst from behind the stone wall and flung themselves upon their former enemies. Not in mortal combat, but embracing them in brotherly love and affection.
William Faulkner said once that history is not was, it's is. And what we need to remember about the Civil War is that the Civil War is, in the present as well as in the past. The generation that fought the war, the generation that argued over the definition of the war, the generation that had to pay the price in blood, that had to pay the price in blasted hopes and a lost future, also established a standard that will not mean anything until we have finished the work.
We're camping tonight on the old campground. Give us a song to cheer our weary hearts.
Gettysburg's guns are still, and the dead sleep on. America's most famous battleground is a camp again, with a road dividing the blue and gray. There is no other dividing line now, as 2,500 veterans gather from north and south to mark the 75th anniversary of America's Armageddon.
Hello! Hello!
All right. That's the rebel yell.
We think that we are a wholly superior people. If we'd been anything like as superior as we think we are, we would not have fought that war. But since we did fight it, we have to make it the greatest war of all times. And our generals were the greatest generals of all time. It's very American to do that. Who knows, he asked as his narrative drew toward its close, but it may be given to us after this life to meet again in the old quarters, to play chess and draughts, to get up soon to answer the morning roll call, to fall in at the tap of the drum for drill and dress parade, and again to hastily don our war gear while the monotonous patter of the long roll summons to battle. Who knows but again the old flags, ragged and torn, snapping in the wind, may face each other and flutter, pursuing and pursued, while the cries of victory fill a summer day. And after the battle, then the slain and wounded will arise, and all will meet together under the two flags, all sound and well, and there will be talking and laughter and cheers, and all will say, did it not seem real? Was it not as in the old days?